Welcome to another video tutorial. In this video, we're going to take a look at how to set up classes inside RPG in a Box. So, for example, if you're a fighter, a mage, a rogue, or any other type of class system that you want to set up in your game. Now, classes are not something that's built into RPG in a Box. It's something you have to set up yourself. So I will walk you through in this video one such way of doing so. However, as with any manual implemented system, you can go about this any way you wish. But if you are wanting to know how you would start such a system, or if you want to know what, in my opinion, is the best way to go about such a system, then that's what this video is going to cover. Okay? So, with that said, let's go into this. So the first part of setting up a class in your game is to think about what stats and abilities are you going to have your class have. So first thing we should do is we should go to the stats tab and go to the character stats section, and we should think about what stats do we need for our class. So health is probably a good one, so that would be the max HP stat. Okay, then we probably want attack and defense. And then what we'll do is we'll add a few custom ones as well, just so that we're covering how to use custom stats as well. So we'll use a couple of the inbuilt ones. So we'll use max HP, attack, and defense. And then we'll make a couple of custom ones for if you're using a custom setup. So what we'll do is we'll click the add button, and we'll add a stat called wit. We'll add a stat called intelligence. And we'll add a stat charisma. So these are a few that you'd find in the D&D system. Okay, so we'll incorporate some of those as well. We could also set up skills. So, for example, if one of the classes is a mage, for example, then you might want that. If you pick that class, then you start with a skill. So let's say we set that up. So if we'd add a skill, for now we'll just call this fireball or something. We won't set up an image, we'll just leave it as it is. But we could say that this is usable in combat, active, and we won't set it to use a stat, but you could do, for example, you could make it use the mana points stat. But we'll target an enemy, and then we'll add an effect, which is to damage an enemy. Okay? And it can damage them for 10 health. And if we wanted to, we could also add a script, and then you'd write a script that makes the fireball, fire projectile or something like that. We're not actually going to set up a working skill. It's just to show you that you could set up a skill and how we can get your class to use that skill. Okay? So we've got a simple skill here that's just going to damage an enemy that you click on. And we could set this to, combat, or I think magic makes the most sense, being a fireball skill. Okay? So we'll set it up so that if you pick to be the mage, for example, you'll get this skill. So once we've chosen what our stats and skills are going to be, the next thing we need to do is think about how are we going to tie these stats and skills to a class, so that when you pick, for example, the mage, your stats get set to the right numbers and your skills get given to you if you pick that class, for example. How are we going to go about doing this? So as I say, there are many different ways you could go about doing this. In my opinion, the best way to do this is to use what's called a JSON file. Now, I've covered JSON files before, so I will put a link in the YouTube video description to my video on JSON, so you can take a deeper look at those if they're new to you and you need to understand what those are first. Feel free to check out that video, but they're very useful. One of the big advantages to JSON files is you can take a huge chunk of data that would otherwise be taking up memory in the code of your game and instead you can put it in a remote file, and then you can have your game grab the relevant data from that file as and when it's needed, rather than having it always be in memory of the game the whole time. So what we can do is we can put all of the stats and all of the class information together into a JSON file, and our game doesn't need to then worry about keeping this connection all the time. It can just retrieve the information as and when it's needed. Okay, so to create a JSON file, what you're going to need to do is, with your project open, pick any file that's in the Game Explorer. So I'll use the map, for example. You're going to right click and you're going to click Open File Location. As soon as you click that, it should bring up a Windows Explorer and show your project files. So I've just done that, and here I am in the Maps folder of my project because I right-clicked on this file in the Game Explorer, so it's taken me to this file. So I'm inside my RPG in a Box folder. Classes is my project. Maps is the folder within my project. So what I want to do is I want to go back to my main project folder. So you should see characters, dialogues, effects, that sort of thing. We're going to right-click and we're going to create a new folder. We're going to call this folder Data. Now, it's important what you call it. It has to be called Data, and everything is lowercase. Okay? So call your folder Data, and then within that folder, you're going to right-click and you're going to create a new text file, and you're going to call this file classes.json. Okay? Now, you'll notice that in this case, because of the operating system that I'm using, which is the Steam Deck, it defaults to showing me the file extension at the end. So although I've called this classes.json, it's actually a .txt file, okay, because of the last bit of text here. So what I want to do is I want to delete that, so it's a .json file, not a .txt file. So when I click OK, it will create an actual JSON file. So make sure that with your operating system that you have it set to show extensions, so file extensions. So if all you see is just the word classes, but you don't see the dot whatever afterwards, then you need to make sure that your operating system has that ability. So turn on file extensions, and then you can actually rename the extension from whatever it is to .json, okay? So with that file now created, we're going to open that in a text editor. For this, I recommend something like Notepad++. You can obviously use whatever text editor you want. I would advise not using the inbuilt Notepad. It's a bit basic for building out JSON files, but you use whatever you want to use, okay? So let's talk about how we're going to lay out this classes JSON file. So another thing to know about JSON, and again, this is all covered in the main JSON video, but I'm just going to repeat things a little bit just so that, you know, you get all the information in this video as well, just maybe not as in depth. So with JSON files, in regards to RPG in a Box, they contain either arrays or codexes. They can contain both, but those are the two things that they would contain, arrays and codexes, okay? And we're actually going to use both for our classes, okay? So to create an array in a JSON file, you basically open and close square brackets. So those are the, on a standard keyboard, in my case, they're the ones to the right of the P key, okay? So I just press open and close square brackets, okay? And I'm going to press enter twice to create a divide in between them, okay? And then in between these square brackets, we're going to open and close two squiggly brackets or curly braces, okay? That's done by pressing shift and pressing the two keys to the right of the P key, okay? Again, if your keyboard is different to mine, then obviously those keys might not necessarily be there, but as long as you know what keys they are, you need to press those keys, okay? So the two square brackets denote an array. So these curly braces are inside an array, okay? The curly braces denote a codex. So the data that we're going to write in between these curly brackets are essentially a codex. Now, what is a codex? Or what is an array, if you're not familiar with these things? So array is basically array is basically a variable, a data type. But whereas, for example, a string or a number variable can only hold one thing, a single number or a single string, an array can hold multiple things. So you can have multiple strings, you could have multiple numbers, or it could be a combination of strings and numbers. Arrays can hold many different things, okay? Codexes are the same. They are like arrays. They hold lots of different information. The difference, however, between an array and a codex is that arrays are indexed by number, whereas codexes have a key value system, which means that you can grab data and look up data based on its name rather than some arbitrary number, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to create a codex for each class that's going to be inside a main array. So this array here in this JSON is just going to be one array. However, there's going to be multiple of these codexes, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to press tab so that we go indented one inside the curly brackets. And the first key that we're going to make is class. So put it inside speech marks, so make it a string. Every key needs to be a string, okay? So put inside a string the word class. You're going to type colon, space, and then we'll create another string, so open and close speech marks, and then give your first class a name. So I will type fighter into there. You can obviously put warrior or barbarian or space ranger or whatever class game you're trying to make. It doesn't obviously have to be D&D based. It can be, any genre you like, but put the class in that you're trying to create, and then put a comma. Commas are really important. They tell, in this case, the codex, that there's more data to come. We haven't finished with this codex yet. So put the comma in and then press enter and create a new line. You don't have to create a new line. You can put all of this on one line. However, I recommend putting everything on a new line because it makes it easier to spot, for example, these commas at the end of each line. You can tell which lines are missing it if you've got any errors. And also, it just makes your data easier to read if it's line by line as opposed to one long, string of data going in one direction. Okay? So the next thing we want to sort out are the stats. So, just trying to think how I want to do this. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm then going to type health in. Again, every key needs to be a string. So this is the key, this is the value. So this is the key, and then we're about to put the value in. Every key, so everything that's going to be on the left-hand side, is a string. Okay, no matter what the data that goes into it is, the key is always a string. We're going to put a colon, a space. However, the data type for health is going to be a number, because this is going to go into the max HP stat. So this is where you then decide how much health is a fighter going to have. So they're a brawler, so let's give them, let's say, 30 health, something like that. Okay. Then press enter after putting a comma in, so that, again, we're telling the codex it's not finished yet. There's more data to come. Next, we'll have attack, colon, and we're just going to go through for a moment, just filling in the different stats, because we've got attack, we've got defense, and then we've got our custom ones, wit, charisma, and intelligence. So we'll go through and we'll just fill those in for our fighter. I'm just trying to think, do I need anything else? Do I want to put anything else in? Yes. So what I'm also going to put in is skill and skill 0001. So that's the ID of our skill. If we go back to RPG in a box for a second, we created this skill down here, the fireball. It's got skill 0001. Okay. Now, actually, I don't want to give that skill to the fighter. Go back to our JSON file, and what I'm actually going to do is just type. If If you had a skill that you wanted the fighter to have, you would put that ID in, but I haven't set up a skill for the fighter. So for this, I will type none, and I will just check for none in the script, okay? When you're then finished, you don't put a comma on the last one. So there's going to be no comma in this case next to none. However, this isn't the only class. There are other classes to come. So this isn't the last codex inside the main array. So we put a comma at the end of the curly bracket to denote that after this set of curly brackets is going to be another set of curly brackets. And again, inside this set is now a whole new class. So we'll copy this and we'll paste inside, and then we'll just make changes. So this can be a mage, and then skill, this is where the fireball comes in. So we'll give the skill ID in there as well. Again, this isn't the last codex. We'll create 3 classes for this tutorial. You can obviously create as many as you want. So we'll paste again, and this can be a rogue. Or let's do a bard just so we can create a completely different type of character. So 5 health, 3 attack, 2 defense, but 19 wit, moderate intelligence, 15 intelligence, and high charisma, 20 charisma, right? So this is a character that's really not built for fighting, but, you know, would easily win conversations and things like that. And maybe even has a skill. You'd give them a skill, okay? I'm going to type none because I haven't set one up. If you had a skill, for example, that persuaded people or something like that, you would give that skill at the beginning. Now, this is the last class in my example, so I'm not going to put a comma at the end of this codex, and there's no other arrays in this JSON either, so that's the file created, okay? So hopefully that's made sense about what we're doing with the JSON file, okay? So when you've done that, you're going to save that file and go back to RPG in a Box. So here we are back inside RPG in a Box, and now we need to set up our class system. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the UI editor, and we'll just create a widget. I'm not going to create anything fancy. It's just to show you how you would go about getting this information on screen, and then you can customize it to make it fit your needs, okay? So I'm going to create a new widget, which I'll just call class. Yeah, I'll just call it classes for now, just makes it easier, or class info. Okay, and all I'm literally going to do is just chuck a few text labels on it, nothing fancy. So we'll chuck one of those in there and one there as well. So we need to think, what stats do we have? So we've got health, attack, defense, wit, intelligence. Oops, that's a field on a label, and that's charisma. We won't show the skill. We'll do that with the skills bar. So we're going to have the title of the class. So we'll type class here, colon, space, and then if you just click the insert expression button, we're going to click that, and we're actually going to create a player property, okay? So we're going to click player property, and we're going to type where it says prop name, we can type it here actually, delete this and type class, okay? So we're going to create a property called class, and that's what this text field is going to show. So it's going to say class, colon, and then the data of the class. That's what the code looks like. $, open and close curly brackets, and then the player property inside, okay? And we're going to kind of repeat that for these. So this is going to be health. And we're going to go to the end, press space, click insert expression. However, this time, we're going to scroll down to player stat, and we're going to set this to max HP. We're going to click this one. This is going to be attack, colon, space, insert expression, player stat, just change where it says max HP, just delete that bit and type attack, make sure it's within the quotes. Then we go to defense, and we're just going to repeat this basically. We're going to change every stat to the correct one for the one we're on. So defense for this one, and then this is going to be wit. This is going to be intelligence. And this is going to be charisma. And just to show you a different way of doing it, you don't have to click insert expression. Once you get familiar with the code, you can just write it out yourself. Okay, but if you don't want to do it that way, you can just click insert expression and make sure you change the stat to match the one for this example, in this case, charisma. Okay, so we've now set up this field to show our class, this to show our health, our attack, our defense, our wit, our intelligence, our charisma. So this is purely just to show a visual indication that our data is working. Okay, it's going to bring the data in from that JSON file and show us all the class information. Okay, however, it's not just going to show the data from the JSON, it's actually going to show it as it's applied to the player. So this won't just show what's inside the JSON, it's actually going to show what's been applied to the player. So at the same time as bringing in the data from the JSON, we're also going to actually make the player be this class, going to have these stats and have the skill. Okay, so we'll save that. We need to also go to our game configuration, go to our user interface section, and make sure the skill bar is on so that we can see whether we've got that skill or not. We're going to click OK. And then we're going to create a script. And this is the script that's going to bring everything together. Okay, so create a new script. First thing we'll do in startup is we'll open up the startup script and we'll edit this. So in startup, we want to give the player a choice for their class. So what we'll do is we'll bring in a display choices first. So we'll do it this way. I'll just type display choices and drag this into here. And we'll change the question to be pick a class. And then the choices are fighter. Now, to make this work with our JSON file, write them in the same order as they are in the JSON file. So I created the fighter and then the mage and then the bard. So that's how I'm going to put them as choices in the display choices. So then it's seamless. We don't have to do any extra work. You'll see in a moment that this will just work perfectly if you do it this way. So we want mage to come next and then bard to come after that. And then we don't want the NPC bit because nobody's actually going to specifically say this. It's a game. It's the game giving us the choice rather than an NPC. So get rid of who said it. Okay. Now, this needs to go into a variable because once you've made a choice, it needs to be stored. So we'll make a local variable called class. So type $class equals and then the display choices. So when you pick a choice, your choice will get stored inside $class. Okay. So what we can then do is this. We can create another variable called class data, and it's going to equal data, open and close square brackets, and within the square brackets inside a string, you're going to type the file name of your JSON, including .json. So in my case, classes.json, like that. And then after the square brackets, you're going to open and close another set of square brackets. And within those square brackets, you're going to type class. Okay, this variable here. Okay, what that's going to do is, so let's explain a little bit about how this works. So our JSON file is structured in such a way that you have the JSON file itself, and then inside the JSON file is an array, and inside that array are a set of codexes containing our, in this case, free classes. So they would just be free, like that, okay? So in this bracket here is the file name, like that, okay? So that's referencing the whole file. Then we need to reference which index, because inside this file is an array, and inside the array are free codexes, right? So how do we know which one of these codexes we want? Well, it's based on the number that you pass in to the array, whether it's a 0 or a 1 or a 2, that will bring back the relevant one of these free boxes, okay? Now, arrays start from 0, they don't start from 1, okay? And that's the same with display choices. That's why we've made sure that we typed fighter first and then mage and then bard, so that the number, when you click the choice, this will be a number between 0, 1, or 2. And because our JSON file is structured the same way, by passing this number into our data retrieval command, it will just return the data for the choice that we make. We don't have to do anything to the choice afterwards, like convert it to a different number or something. By putting that in the same order as we've written our JSON file, it means that the choice you make will automatically grab the right class. Obviously, if you're not using display choices, by the way, if you're doing it via widgets, then you'll do it a different way. But this is just to show you one quick way we can implement this system, okay? So by passing in class to this data request, it's going to grab the relevant codex. So if we picked fighter, for example, then the class will be 0. So this will be the equivalent of saying, give us the first codex. So that's going to be this codex here that's got fighter in it, that's got HP 20 or whatever in it. It's going to return all of that stuff, okay? Whereas if we'd clicked mage, then this would be the number 1 instead, and that would return this box. And this has got mage in it with the health of 15 or whatever it was, right? So that's why the display choices work so well, is because once you pick something, it gives you a number, and we're going to use that number in the JSON file to grab the relevant box, okay? So that's what's going to be inside class data after we've done this. It's going to be all of the stuff related to, for example, the fighter. It's going to have the class name, it's going to have the health, the wit, the intelligence. All of that is going to be inside this data file. This data file is basically now going to be a codex, okay? So class data is the equivalent of typing codex class fighter, for example. Oops. Health 20, etc. It's the equivalent of typing that manually. But we don't have to type it manually, and we don't have to store this in our game by doing it this way. We're retrieving it instead via this command when we need it, okay? So this variable will now contain the data we want, but it didn't until we needed it, okay? So now we've created a class data file that's storing only the information relevant to our particular class. So it's not storing the mage and the bard as well. It's only storing currently the one that's relevant for what you've picked. Now we need to obviously use that data. So what do we do with it? So the first thing we want to do is we want to set the player property. So we're going to type player.property class equals $class data, because that's what's got the data in it for the class. But then you need to open and close square brackets. And then within the square brackets, you're going to type the key that's relevant to the value that you want to go into this property. So we want the class name to go into this property. Well, that's class. Because if we look at our JSON file, you can see that we type class and then fighter or mage or bard is the data we then want to populate the property with. So by calling this key, we'll get this value back. Okay, so going back to our code, we then want to set up all the stats. So player.stat max HP, we want that to equal $class data, open and close square brackets, and then the key we're going to pass in is health. And then that will put 30 into our stat. Like so. Okay, so now our HP will be 30 based on the class that we pick. And then what we'll do is we'll just copy this and paste it a few more times because we're just going to do a whole load of stat stuff. So attack, defense, wit, charisma, intelligence. So this is going to be attack. This is going to be attack. This is going to be defense. And this is going to be defense. Now, just to make life easier, I've called the Codex information to say, I've given the keys inside the JSON file the same name as the stats. But you don't have to. You could call your key something different. For example, your stats could be wit. But if you called your, if you put witty as the key for your JSON file, so let me just show that just so it's clear what I'm saying. So if instead of wit, the key was witty inside your JSON file, then that's what you would put here. So whenever it comes to the stuff that's in your JSON data, you make sure you reference the key name as it is in your JSON so that that data goes inside your stat, okay? But because I called them the same, that's why I'm using the same names, okay? But you don't have to use the same names for your JSON if you don't want to. Don't know why you would necessarily make it different, but if you wanted to, you can, and that's important to know. So this is intelligence. That's going to be obviously intelligence, the key intelligence. And then the last one is charisma. Okay, so those are our stats. And then we've got a skill. So what we should do as well is just check if class data skill, that's the key that we put the ID in, if that's not equal to none, then that means there's a skill that we can give to the player. If you've specifically typed none into your JSON file, like we've got here and here, then we want to ignore the skill. But with this one, it's not going to be none. It's going to actually have an ID in it. In that case, we want to give the player a skill with that ID. So if the skill is not none, then give skill, and then it would be class data skill. I'm not sure if there's any more that needs to go into a give skill. Let me just check. Do you need to specify anything else? No, it's just the string for the skill. So that's all you need to do. Give skill, and then you'll use the ID string that comes from this key here. And that will effectively give the player any skills that they should have for their class. Okay. Keeping it simple for now. Obviously, if you wanted multiple classes per class, then instead of a string in your JSON file, this would be an array. So it gets a little bit more complicated. You'd have to put square brackets in for this. So you'd have something like this. Sorry, that's the none one. For this, you'd have square brackets here to denote that this is an array. And then you'd have skill 001, comma, and then you'd have another one, skill 0005 or whatever, and then you'd have no more commas, and then you put a final close square brackets. That would then be an array inside this codex. That makes sense? And then obviously when you're referencing that in your code, sorry, let's get rid of the skill 5. That's not going to work because it's not an array anymore. When you're referencing it in your code, you would then grab all of that. Well, basically it would be an array, so you would for loop through it. So just to show that, you would for $skill in $data, class data, and then the key for your array, which would be skill or skills if you're doing it plural do. So now we've got a for loop that's going to go through all of the skills in that array. So it's going to be skill 1, skill 5, skill all the IDs, and then you would do give skill $skill, this one here, okay? And that will then loop through all of the skills in that array that's in that key and give the player all those skills, okay? But we'll keep it simple for this example where this class just has one skill, so we're just going to give that skill, if it's not none, to the player, okay? And we'll click apply and save. What we also need to do in our startup is show widget. We need to show both of these widgets. So we'll show widget class panel, so we can see, or is it class info? Can't remember what I called it. I'll check in a minute. The widget that we created that has all the text on it. But we also need to show widget skill R, so we can see our skill if we have it. Okay? Apply and save. So basically at startup, what's going to happen is we're going to be presented with a choice. We choose our fighter, mage, bard, whichever one we choose. It then grabs from the JSON file the relevant codex that's got all the stats and everything connected to that class. And it's then going to then populate the stats and the properties on the player for those pieces of information and give skills if there's any. Okay. Obviously, you can, the limit is your imagination. If you wanted to, give particular weapons or items based on your class, then you can add those to the JSON as well. Like we did with the skill, you could have, for example, items. This could then be an array, so you'd open and close square brackets, string with your item IDs, item 0001, whatever, and then that way you can have items, and then you'd use give item, just like we did with the give skill. So you can also obviously have particular classes start you off with particular items. So, I'm not going to cover that in this video. I've briefly mentioned it, but just to show you that, you can go wherever you want with this once you get familiar with how JSONs work and how we're bringing this information in. So with that set up, now let's test this out. So here we are at the start of a new game, and I can pick a class, fighter, mage, or bard. So let's say I pick fighter. So let's take a look at that error for a second. Why is wit stat and intelligence stat complaining, but charisma didn't? Oh, yes. Well, there's a problem. I didn't type intelligence, probably in there. But why is wit not working? Oh, of course, I called it witty when it came to the fighter. That should have been changed back. That's why that was failing. Again, make sure your names match what you're putting in your code and in your JSON, okay? I deliberately set them up to be the same, but obviously I went off course a little bit to show you that you could have named them anything. And in doing so, I offset them. So that should now work flawlessly. So we'll just test it one more time. So if we pick fighter now we get our, I should have put that in the top corner rather than in the center, but it doesn't matter. It's just to demonstrate, right? So that's set our class up. And these numbers are actually on our player. They're not just on the widget for looks. They are actually the stats of our player. So for example, if I bring down the console and I print player, player.stat HP, what is our health currently? 20. Ah, okay, yes, so we do need to actually set the HP as well. I thought setting the max HP would do that automatically. So go back to our JSON file. And we actually need to add, well, actually, no, we don't need to add it to the JSON file. We just need to add it to the script. So we need to change both of these stats, okay? Because the way RPG in a Box works is you have a maximum HP and then you have a current HP. So we need to set both of those at the beginning of the game to the value that's inside the JSON file. So in this case, player stat HP is also going to be class data health. Okay, so they both get set at the same time to 30, for example. Now you want to do the max HP first, because if you try and set health to a value that's higher than the current maximum, it won't do it. So by increasing the maximum first and then setting the health to it, that's the order that you want to do things in. Does that make sense? So save that, and now what we can do as well to just visually show this for now is if we go to user interface, we'll show player health as well. And while we're here, let's go to the UI and let's put this in the top left. And let's play again. So now if we pick fighter, there's our class fighter, health 30, attack 30, 25, 5, 5, 6. And if we look down at the bottom at our health, 30 out of 30. So we've got 30 health out of a maximum of 30, okay? Now, what we can do is we can re-execute the startup script. Okay, and we can pick a different outcome. Let's pick the mage. We have a skill straight away, fireball. We have 10 health out of 10 health. We're a mage, 10, 10, 20 defense, wit 15, intelligence 20, charisma 7. Okay, let's run execute startup again. Let's pick the bard. Now, the only reason we've got the skill still is we didn't specifically say that if we pick a different class to remove any assigned skills. Now, bear in mind, this script is usually designed for a new game. So if I was to quit to the menu and then click new game and then click bard, now I don't have the skill. It's just purely because I was re-executing the startup without actually quitting to menu. But you might want to put a thing in place that says if you pick a different class, clear out all skills first, you know. But nonetheless, here we are. We've clicked the bard. We've got 5 health now. And there's our class 5, 3, 2, but high intelligence and charisma and wit. Okay, so that should give you an idea of how to create classes that basically tie a load of different stats together, put them all under one name, and then how you can retrieve that information based on a choice and then assign that information to a player character. If you want to check what class somebody is, we can use the class property for that. So you can say if player.property class equals bard, then that's detected if they're a bard or not. So for example, go to our script. We won't create a script that actually does this, but we would just type if player.property class is equal to bard, then, and now this script would then be true if the player was a bard. So then you could have dialogue happen or something happens if they're a bard. Now, if you want, you can also apply this to NPCs as well, but obviously NPCs you wouldn't set up at runtime. You would set them up on the map editor. So for example, if I wanted Sarah to be a bard, for example, then I would actually set her stats in I think you have to do it on the model itself. So you might want to do it in startup, but then you'd have to keep doing that per entity. So if you know that there's only one Sarah and she's going to be a bard, then you open up the voxel model for Sarah and you'd set her health, her magic, or her attack, her defense. Now, obviously, you're not going to have the custom ones, which is a bit annoying that you can't do that on the voxel model. So there's going to have to be an element where you're setting it at startup, annoyingly. But what you can also do, what I was going to mention though, is you go to custom properties and you'd add a property which is a string, and the property would be class, and then you'd give her the string bard. And then just like you can with the player, then you can query if Sarah.class equals bard, then you know what class she is. So you can give NPCs and enemies classes this way by just giving them a property, but you will have to set up their stats in the startup script, at least the ones that are custom, because annoyingly there doesn't seem to be a way to add the custom stats, which would be nice if that was added, but it's not in there currently, so it's worth noting that. So you would have to go into your startup script. So you'd give Sarah an ID, so let's just call it NPC1. Okay, save that, and then in your startup script you'd obviously have to be in the same map as Sarah, which is kind of a bit of a sort of limitation for this, but you would then type entity NPC1 dot stat wict, and then if she's a bard it equals 15 or whatever, right? So you'd have to set them up that way, which is a bit annoying, but obviously you can use at this point you could use the JSON file. If you know that they're a bard, then you can grab the bard specifically without having to query, a result of a choice. You would just, if you know Sarah's a bard, then you'd say bard data equals data classes dot JSON 2, and that brings back specifically the bard codex. And then you would do what we did here, but you would do entity npc1.property class equals bard data class player stat, or entity npc1 stat max HP equals bard data health, etc, etc, etc. Does that make sense? So I want to bring this video to a close. It's been quite a long one, so I'm going to wrap it up here, but hopefully it's covered enough to give you an idea of how to implement a class system into your games that collect all your stats that you need for that class into one location, and then you make a choice, and then that choice gives you all those stats and properties and even skills or items based on what you choose. Okay, so with that said, that will wrap up this video. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next tutorial.